For over a century, one of the most closely guarded secrets of the British monarchy lay hidden beneath velvet covers and vaults of silence, Queen Mary's emerald collection. Its existence whispered in corridors and hinted at in coded ledgers. But now, in a move no one saw coming, the truth has exploded into the open, and Catherine is at the heart of it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Whispers of Queen Mary's fabled emeralds have long lingered like smoke in the shadows of Buckingham Palace. These weren't mere jewels, they were symbols of lineage, control, and unspeakable legacy. Valued beyond wealth, they were quietly removed from public catalogues after her passing and absorbed into a secret trust known only to a handful of matriarchs. Generations passed, and the jewels vanished from all records, intentionally erased from inventory reports and public exhibitions. The royal protocol of selective inheritance ensured that only a chosen successor, aligned with the crown's future vision, could receive such a gift. But the true nature of this inheritance was never meant to see daylight. Until now. Following Queen Elizabeth's passing, an unprecedented flurry of activity was noted within the palace's legal departments. Trusted archivists reported a disappearance of key documents related to Queen Mary's personal vault. Among the missing were ledgers rumoured to contain encoded directives regarding the emeralds. No statement was ever issued, and speculation grew rampant behind the scenes. Then came the first sign of a seismic shift, an unannounced, highly confidential meeting between the Crown Jeweller and the Princess of Wales. Scheduled quietly under the pretense of a restoration briefing, the true purpose of their meeting was known only to a select few. But one chilling detail emerged from palace insiders. Catherine left that meeting with an envelope bearing Queen Mary's private crest. As the days passed, silence engulfed the palace, but behind closed doors, whispers turned to tension. Camilla, notably absent from public appearances during this period, was said to be in seclusion at Mill House. The timing raised eyebrows. For someone presumed to be the rightful custodian of the emerald legacy as queen consort, her absence on the day the vault was accessed spoke volumes. Sources confirm that Catherine was personally escorted by senior members of the royal household to the site of the sealed chamber beneath Windsor. Described internally as protected by a matriarchal lock, the vault was designed to recognize only a singular heir, predetermined, approved, and sealed away decades prior. The unlocking of the chamber triggered alarms, not of security, but of legacy. With one gesture, history was rewritten, and the jewels that had been hidden away since the era of empire were placed into Catherine's hands. Not through politics, not through coronation, but through lineage, symbolism, and silent authority. It wasn't about who wore the crown, it was about who represented the future of the monarchy. Catherine had been chosen not just by tradition but by prophecy, by a queen long gone, but never truly silent. And now, as the emeralds gleamed once more in private light, the world was about to learn just how far this inheritance reached. But if the emeralds had truly been sealed away for Catherine, the burning question remains: who orchestrated this decision? And why now? Buried beneath layers of ceremonial language and royal red tape lies a hidden clause in Queen Mary's private codicil. For decades, the royal family kept it classified, but when unearthed by legal staff during an internal review, it shook the monarchy to its core. The clause names an unlikely heir, and it isn't Camilla. The revelation began quietly, just another routine archival audit, or so it seemed. Triggered by Princess Anne's security directive to reassess all classified inheritance documents, legal personnel were tasked with reviewing files untouched since Queen Elizabeth's early reign. What they uncovered stunned even the most seasoned courtiers. Among a brittle stack of parchment sealed in wax-bearing, Queen Mary's personal insignia was a 1951 codicil, an amendment to her last will and testament. At first glance, it appeared ceremonial, riddled with poetic language and vague allusions to heritage. But one phrase arrested the room in silence. "To she who mirrors the monarchy's future, I leave the crown's emerald breath intact, untouched, and undisputed." Legal analysts immediately flagged the line as significant, its poetic ambiguity concealing a sharp legal edge. This was not metaphor, This was instruction. While Camilla had long been assumed the natural inheritor, this clause disrupted that expectation entirely. Nowhere in the document was her name mentioned. Instead, in the codicil's margin, scribbled in Queen Elizabeth's handwriting decades later during a formal review, appeared a single name, Catherine. Next to it, underlined in royal blue, was the phrase, matriarchal continuity. For those who understood the nuances of monarchical succession, it was a signal impossible to misread. Catherine had not only been foreseen as Queen Mary's rightful heir, she had been prepared for it. Whether consciously or not, her role had always been in motion, waiting for this key to unlock its legitimacy. What followed inside the Privy Council was nothing short of political combustion. Senior members, many of whom had assumed the Emerald Collection would pass to the reigning Queen Consort, found themselves caught in a vortex of legal fact and emotional disbelief. Heated debates erupted behind closed doors. One lord reportedly stormed out of the chamber, muttering, "They've rewritten blood with favour." But the Royal Archives had verified it. The codicil was authentic. The clause had legal standing, and the Queen herself had made a final notation confirming its interpretation. News reached Camilla in the late afternoon. Those present during her briefing described the moment in stark terms: shocked silence, a blank stare, and then an immediate, wordless retreat. No public statement, no counterclaim, just absence. And within the vacuum her silence created, Catherine's legitimacy was no longer a matter of preference. It became institutional truth. She wasn't just chosen, she was legally enshrined. The emeralds weren't handed to her out of sentiment. They were delivered by decree, sealed in ink and sovereign intent. But even legal documents can't prepare anyone for the emotional unraveling that follows when loyalties are questioned and royal power shifts beneath one's feet. Behind closed doors at Clarence House, a confrontation erupted that staffers are still reeling from. Camilla, stunned by the revelation, reportedly demanded answers, and what followed was a royal outburst that left walls trembling and aides silenced by fear and confusion. The sealed envelope arrived mid-morning, carried not by a courier but by one of the palace's most trusted liaisons, a deliberate gesture meant to signal gravity. As Camilla sliced the seal open with a trembling hand, her eyes scanned the page before her expression shifted from disbelief to fury. The contents were unambiguous. The Emerald Collection had officially passed to Catherine under Queen Mary's codicil, now fully ratified by the Privy Council. No opportunity for her to argue or intervene. And in that silence, rage was born. Within minutes, she ordered her senior aide to arrange an immediate audience with King Charles. But her request was declined, not postponed, not delayed, flatly denied. For Camilla, this wasn't just a personal insult. It was the ultimate betrayal. The tension exploded in a storm of disbelief and anger. One shaken footman later confided to a trusted friend. She screamed that it had been stolen, that Catherine had taken what was rightfully hers. What followed was chaos. Shattered porcelain littered the floor of her drawing room. A single emerald earring, one of her favorites, was hurled at the wall with such force that it embedded itself into the plaster. Staffers were reportedly told to leave the wing, and for nearly 2 hours, Clarence House was plunged into lockdown. Whispers of the outburst spread quickly through the royal estate, but no one dared speak on record. Yet behind the shock was something deeper, more unsettling. Camilla had genuinely believed the emeralds were hers by default, by rank, by role. But perhaps most disturbing of all was what she said next. In a fit of tightly controlled menace, Camilla warned her inner circle that she had everything in writing. Cryptic but chilling, the comment referred to her private correspondence with Queen Elizabeth, letters exchanged in the early days of her marriage to Charles, some allegedly discussing matters of inheritance and future royal roles. The implication was clear. If pushed further, she would not hesitate to release them. This wasn't grief. It wasn't confusion. It was a threat, and one no one was prepared to answer. Speculation mounted. Some aides began to question whether Camilla's long-standing belief that she was the Queen's successor in every way had been a quiet delusion, nurtured by nods, gestures, and polite omissions. Others believed she had been promised something privately, something now being denied in public. But the damage was done. The queen consort, once secure in her place, had been reduced to a figure of fury and isolation, unraveling behind palace doors while the world outside prepared for a very different kind of royal transformation. Yet, as Camilla simmered, another figure quietly prepared for a moment that would redefine her place in royal history. While others shouted and scrambled, Catherine remained still. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Beneath her calm exterior, she was being briefed on the most powerful inheritance since the crown itself. And when she emerged, everything had changed. In the midst of the storm that gripped Clarence House and rattled every corridor of power, Catherine stood untouched by the chaos. While aides ran damage control and Camilla descended into fury, Catherine took no victory lap, issued no statement, and offered no glance toward the growing noise. Behind closed doors, she met instead with the royal historian, a figure who had long served as guardian of secrets too dangerous to be recorded publicly. The discussion was not about jewels or glamour, it was about heritage, the coded legacy embedded within each emerald, and the message Queen Mary intended to deliver through her posthumous decision. Hours later, the keeper of the vault, a figure so rarely seen he is referred to only in whispers, arrived at Kensington. This wasn't mere ceremony. It was an official transmission of power veiled in tradition, and Catherine received it with an eerie calm that unsettled even the most seasoned palace staff. The next day, the world saw what many missed. During a televised charity engagement, Catherine appeared in an understated green ensemble, but clipped neatly to her collar was a single, unmistakable brooch, Queen Mary's signature emerald emblem. No mention was made of it. No headline acknowledged its presence. But those who understood royal symbolism saw it immediately. It was not a fashion choice. It was a declaration. A quiet, deliberate response to Camilla's outburst, spoken not with words but with legacy. In less than 30 seconds of airtime, Catherine redefined the balance of public perception. Within hours, body language experts and royal commentators flooded the airwaves. They didn't talk about jewels, they talked about command. Catherine's stillness, her posture, her unwavering gaze all signaled not submission, but supreme confidence. The palace may not have made a formal announcement, but the message was received. Catherine was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She had become something else, an embodiment of monarchical memory, handpicked by a queen from a different century, trusted more than the one seated beside the throne. On social media, the shift became a wave. Supporters flooded platforms with the hashtag number The Emerald Queen. Fan accounts shared side-by-side comparisons of Catherine and Queen Mary, emphasizing their shared stoicism, grace, and enduring presence. Petitions began circulating for a public display of the Emerald collection. Meanwhile, Catherine remained silent, her every move calculated and minimal, but it was the silence that screamed. Even Prince William, ever the reserved heir, stepped into the frame with unprecedented intention. His appearances were brief but perfectly timed, each standing beside Catherine without speaking a word of the emeralds, his presence alone an endorsement of the Queen Mary decision. And yet, this was not the end of the transformation. For while Catherine wore the past like armor, the monarchy had already begun planning something far more deliberate. The emeralds had been claimed, but their true power would only be revealed in a ritual unseen for generations. Because even as Catherine assumed her new symbolic inheritance, the palace machinery began moving toward a secret ceremony shrouded in mystery and monarchy. At the stroke of midnight, under the cover of silence and moonlight, a select group of royal figures gathered at Windsor for a ceremony that has only taken place once every 100 years. The Emerald Vault was finally opened, and the heir was revealed. The night was chosen deliberately, no cameras, no press, no official itinerary to alert even the most observant royal watchers. Windsor Castle's oldest wing was cleared of staff, lights dimmed, corridors sealed. Beneath the marble floors, beyond the reach of modern surveillance, lies a chamber spoken of only in passing among the palace elite, a place where monarchy meets mysticism. This is where it happened. Lit by candlelight and guarded by tradition, the sacred ritual commenced. At the centre stood Princess Anne, not merely as the king's sister, but as a guardian of Queen Mary's ancient wishes. With solemn resolve, she invoked the matriarch's legacy in words passed down through 3 generations, words never recorded in print. Those present say the chamber seemed to still, as if time itself had paused for this reckoning. Before Catherine stood the crown's triple seal mechanism, a security relic preserved since Queen Victoria's reign. 3 keys, each held by a separate royal, were turned in unison, unlocking the steel-encased vault that had not been touched in nearly a century. Inside, cushioned in layers of royal silk, gleamed what historians called the 7 emerald heirlooms. These were not just ornaments, they were relics of rule, each representing a matriarch's sacrifice, each holding stories never told. The signature piece, the emerald tiara once worn by Queen Mary during the 1911 coronation, was lifted with ceremonial gloves and handed to Catherine with reverence. Her hands trembled not from vanity, but from the weight of what it meant. The brooch followed. Then the earrings. And finally, the ring inscribed with a Latin phrase long lost to the public but burned into the memory of the monarchy. Vera Regina expectat. The true queen waits. The crown jeweller, flown in under secrecy, was present to verify each gem's authenticity. His voice, recorded only in private royal archives, confirmed that the collection remained unaltered. No substitutions, no decay. The emeralds had waited in silence for her. As the final piece was placed in Catherine's hands, a hush fell across the chamber. Some say she wept. Others claim she stood completely still, absorbing the gravity without a single word. Whatever the truth, there was no doubt among those present. A passage had occurred, and the monarchy had crossed a line that could never be redrawn. For the royal guard, the event was classified under a code known only to a few, Royal Matriarchal Transfer, Code E. That designation, rare and irreversible, signifies not a gift, but a transition, one of power, one of continuity, one that cannot be contested without challenging the very roots of the institution itself. The vault was resealed, the chamber locked once more. And when Catherine emerged from beneath Windsor's stone heart, she was no longer merely the wife of a future king, she was the living embodiment of a crown's quiet prophecy. And while Catherine received the jewels with humility, another firestorm was erupting in the press because someone had leaked the story. The world awoke to headlines that lit the internet ablaze. Emerald betrayal, Camilla cast aside, and Catherine crowned in secret. As networks scrambled for statements, Buckingham Palace faced its greatest media crisis since Megxit, and the fallout was far from contained. It began with a whisper, as all royal leaks do. A confidential briefing note, marked strictly internal, found its way into the hands of a prominent London tabloid editor. Within hours, details of the midnight ceremony at Windsor, long hidden under the veil of royal secrecy, were being broadcast worldwide. The leak didn't just expose the ritual, it named the heir, detailed the jewels, and described Camilla's absence in blunt, devastating clarity. Palace staff scrambled to contain the storm, but it was too late. The public had tasted scandal, and they wanted more. British tabloids sharpened their knives, painting the moment as a calculated coup. International media, however, leaned into the symbolism. Catherine wasn't just a duchess elevated, she was a future queen anointed by history. The narratives split fast and wide. In the UK, conservative royalists demanded answers about how the Queen Consort could be bypassed so brazenly. Others questioned whether this exposed deeper fractures within the monarchy. But beyond borders, Catherine was hailed as a sovereign in spirit, if not yet in title. Social media exploded with praise and fury alike. Trending tags like number emerald hair and number not my queen drew lines across the digital realm, reflecting the nation's division. But the numbers were clear. Public approval for Catherine and William surged overnight. She was no longer seen merely as the supportive wife of a future king. She had become a symbol poised, chosen, and perhaps even unstoppable. Yet not everyone welcomed this shift. In Parliament, Republican voices reignited calls for a re-evaluation of the monarchy's role. They cited favoritism, secrecy, and generational manipulation as reasons to challenge the Crown's unchecked power. Was Catherine's rise a reflection of merit or machination? Was the monarchy adapting to survive or quietly collapsing under its own legacy? The pressure mounted on Buckingham Palace to respond. After hours of internal debate, the King's press office released a short, calculated statement. Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, continues to carry the legacy of our shared heritage with grace and dignity. No mention of emeralds. No mention of inheritance, just a thinly veiled acknowledgement that something had indeed occurred. Behind the palace gates, Camilla's silence spoke volumes. While no cameras caught her reaction, reports surfaced that she had arranged an emergency consultation with her legal team, not just for clarification but for protection. Insiders claim she questioned the legality of the codicil and whether her private letters with Queen Elizabeth could still hold sway. Her team is said to be preparing options, should she decide to respond publicly. A move that could ignite a constitutional crisis or destroy what little peace remains within the House of Windsor. But even with the world watching, the most intimate confrontation was yet to come between husband and wife, king and consort. Torn between duty and devotion, King Charles faced the most personal crisis of his reign. Should he honour his late mother's wishes and back Catherine, or defend his wife Camilla, whose heartbreak now threatened to unravel everything they had built together? In the solitude of his private study, King Charles reportedly sat in silence with a stack of aged parchment letters written by Queen Elizabeth during the final decade of her reign. They were not public decrees, but personal reflections, warnings wrapped in wisdom. One note, marked with the Queen's unmistakable hand, urged him to choose legacy over comfort when the time arrives. That time had arrived, and now the monarch found himself tethered between two queens, one crowned by state, the other by spirit. His silence, once seen as dignified neutrality, had now become a source of tension. Every moment he withheld his voice fed the fire roaring outside palace gates and within his own household. But the greatest inferno burned behind closed doors where Camilla awaited a response she feared might never come. Their private exchanges were no longer conversations, they were confrontations. Camilla demanded clarity, answers, validation. Her voice, once soft behind palace walls, now thundered with frustration. She accused Charles of betrayal, of cowardice, of letting history be rewritten without her consent. Sources, say the king, usually composed, lashed back, citing duty, lineage, and the monarchy's need to evolve. But even his defences rang hollow. For while he had the power to speak, to sway, to shield, he chose instead to watch the storm consume them both, and still, he refused to make a public stand. In a moment of desperation, Charles turned to Princess Anne, the only one who knew both women beyond the facade. Their exchange, quiet and discreet, was one of heartbreak and realism. Anne reminded him that this wasn't just about emeralds or succession, it was about the survival of the institution they had been born to protect. She told him plainly, if he chose sentiment over structure, the crown would splinter. Charles listened. And then, with the weight of centuries pressing against his chest, he made a symbolic decision he would not interfere. He would allow the will to stand, the ceremony to be remembered, and the emeralds to remain with Catherine. But he would say nothing. The silence echoed. A ripple moved through the monarchy that no press release could contain. Camilla retreated once more, this time not in fury, but in a grief so profound it terrified those closest to her. And Charles? He was last seen walking alone into the chapel at Sandringham, emerging over an hour later with reddened eyes and a bowed head. The man who had waited his entire life to wear the crown now found it heavier than any before him. As the dust settled around Charles, another storm was brewing because Camilla had made her decision, and she wasn't going quietly. In a bold and calculated move, Camilla assembled her inner circle and made a chilling threat, one that could expose decades of royal secrets. If the monarchy wouldn't back her, she would burn the bridges behind her, and the letters she holds may hold the match. Those closest to Camilla described the gathering as tense, almost ritualistic in its secrecy. No aides, no intermediaries, just a handful of trusted confidants summoned to hear what she had decided. For years, Camilla had quietly maintained a private archive, letters, notes, and correspondence exchanged between herself and Queen Elizabeth, along with personal reflections from the earliest days of her life within the royal orbit. These were not ceremonial pleasantries. They were raw, emotional records of conversations never meant to survive their authors. Now, she was prepared to use them. According to a leak that sent shockwaves through royal circles, Camilla's voice was captured during the meeting, steady but edged with steel. "They forget I have their truths." Those words, circulated in hushed recordings among palace insiders, marked a turning point. This was no longer grief. This was leverage. Legal advisors were brought in within hours, not to negotiate, but to calculate damage. They warned that any public release could have constitutional consequences, potentially destabilizing the monarchy's moral authority. Letters written by a reigning queen, especially those touching on inheritance, favoritism, or private doubts, could fracture public trust beyond repair. But Camilla was unmoved. She reportedly argued that if tradition could be weaponized against her, then truth could be too. The very foundation of the crown, its mystery, its restraint, would become its vulnerability, and she was prepared to test just how far the institution could bend before it broke. Then came the whispers that made the palace truly uneasy. Rumors surfaced that Camilla's circle had quietly reached out to Prince Harry's camp. No formal statement, no visible meeting, but sudden shifts in communication patterns, discreet intermediaries, and a chilling alignment of interests. Two figures long, isolated from the monarchy's center, now orbiting the same fracture point. To those who track royal movements, it felt less like coincidence and more like coordination. Almost immediately, security services were alerted, requests were filed. My5 was asked to quietly secure sensitive documents at Sandringham, ensuring that no private archive could disappear overnight. The monarchy was no longer bracing for scandal. It was bracing for exposure, and yet, while Camilla prepared to detonate decades of silence, Catherine prepared for something else entirely. No emergency meetings, no counter-leaks, no visible panic. Those near her say she understood the moment for what it was, a crossroads, not just for her, but for the monarchy's future. She began quietly restructuring her private office, bringing in advisors known not for loyalty, but for resilience. She didn't speak about Camilla's threat. She didn't acknowledge the rumors. Instead, she focused forward on responsibility, on symbolism, on what it meant to carry something greater than herself. Where one woman gathered weapons, the other gathered resolve. And as the world holds its breath, the final jewel is placed not in a vault, but on a head. A crown reshaped not by blood, but by destiny. She began as an outsider, a commoner scrutinized at every step. But now, with Queen Mary's emeralds adorning her legacy and the people at her back, Catherine has emerged as the crown's quiet thunder. Her ascent is no longer a question, it's a coronation in waiting. The title began online, but it didn't stay there. The Emerald Queen, once a fan-made phrase, soon echoed through news reports, political commentary, and whispers within palace walls. It was more than a nickname. It was a declaration of arrival. Catherine's transformation from Duchess to monarch-in-waiting wasn't defined by ceremony. It was marked by quiet influence, calculated grace, and the symbolism of the jewels now inseparable from her name. Those emeralds, once entombed by secrecy, now travelled with her on every Commonwealth visit, not flaunted, not explained, just present. A glimmering reminder that history had chosen her, even when protocol had not. Behind the scenes, her reach began to extend far beyond optics. Patronages previously considered ceremonial were restructured under her leadership, redirected toward education, women's rights, and mental health reform. Former courtiers whispered of strategic changes initiatives once overlooked, now gaining traction under Catherine's steady hand. Even in the most private royal meetings, her voice carried new weight. not loud, never forceful, but immovable. And more than once, senior staffers described decisions being Catherine approved before they were greenlit by the Crown itself. The influence began to bleed into the next generation. Reports surfaced that her children's education had been recalibrated subtly, but deliberately to reflect a matriarchal line of succession. Emphasis on Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, and the legacies of women who had ruled not through throne or title, but through quiet command. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about rewriting the royal narrative entirely centered not on who was king, but on who had been queen all along. And that shift, though whispered and unspoken, was seismic. Perhaps most telling was the re-emergence of Queen Elizabeth's former ladies-in-waiting. Long retired, these women had retreated from public service following Her Majesty's passing. But in a move no one could explain and yet everyone understood, several returned quietly, without ceremony, to advise Catherine. Their presence was seen not as nostalgic, but symbolic. They weren't preserving the past. They were guiding its rebirth. Public sentiment surged. Polls reflected a nation rallying behind her, not out of duty, but desire. Crowds chanted her name softly at engagements. Commentators across the political spectrum echoed one shared refrain: it should have always been her. There was no longer debate, only inevitability. Where once she had stood behind the heir, now she walked beside him, equal in grace, unrivaled in trust. And for the first time in decades, the monarchy began to feel not inherited but earned. And so, the stage is set for a monarchy transformed not by tradition, but by a woman who inherited the past to redefine the future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.